Welcome to the Explainer. Let's just dive straight in today, shall we? We are going to impartially unpack a really fascinating and, honestly, highly provocative philosophical text by an author named Xu Feng. It's called Escape the Array of Affection. Written back in September 2020, this piece lays out a very specific, spiritually charged worldview all about human suffering, earthly attachments, and ultimate liberation. Now, whether you end up agreeing with this premise or you find it totally radical, I promise you it is packed with these striking metaphors that'll make you look at your daily relationships in a completely different light. Our goal right now is to clearly map out Xu Feng's arguments straight from the source text and just explore this complex spiritual framework together.
So the text actually kicks off not with some massive academic theory, but by challenging the reader with a really direct psychological thought experiment. Xu Feng asks us to imagine lying in bed at night, sorting through our mental state, and he just asks, what is the most worrying thing in your life? It's a completely disarming way to start. He's essentially demanding that we personalize his philosophy before he even reveals what his main argument actually is.
And he really doesn't stop there. Zeifan keeps piercing right through the fourth wall, prompting us to reflect on the source of our absolute most severe emotional torment. Like, what is it that has recently brought you the most anguish? He asks what depresses you the most, what concerns you most deeply. He's very intentionally dredging up those heavy, complicated feelings that we all kind of just carry around with us day to day.
Finally, the author pushes this thought experiment to its absolute limit. He asks us to identify that one inescapable bond. You know the one, the thing we desperately want to maintain, but paradoxically, the thing we might also wish we could sever or end, yet we feel totally, utterly unable to. He's painting a picture of a literal, inescapable trap. And right before we can even formulate our own individual answer to all of this, the text drops his ultimate universal conclusion.
According to Xu Feng, the definitive answer to all of these agonizing questions, the worry, the torment, the inescapable trap, is simply human affection. That's it. Not money, not mortality, not your career failures. It's affection.
All right, Section 1, the array of affection. This brings us to the absolute core concept of Xu Feng's worldview. To grasp the rest of this text, we really have to wrap our heads around how he defines this specific term.
So he defines this array as the web of special relationships we build up throughout our entire lives. He explicitly calls out the affection between parents and children, husbands and wives, lovers, friends, classmates, even teachers and students. According to him, any special relationship you establish will inherently entangle you. It literally wraps you up tightly and leaves you restless for your entire lifetime. So the crucial takeaway here is that in this philosophy, love and connection aren't seen as our ultimate salvation. Actually, scratch that. They are viewed as the exact binding forces that trap the human spirit.
Now, Xu Feng walks a bit of a philosophical tightrope here. He uses a really relatable analogy, salt and food. He acknowledges that affection is the condiment of life. Too little is dull, too much is bitter. He writes that a happy life isn't completely unfeeling, and states that being totally unfeeling actually makes someone worse than a beast. But on the flip side, the text warns that being overly trapped by these emotional bonds is a fate worse than death. He goes as far as to say that once someone is poisoned by affection, they become hysterical, perverted, and totally lose their minds.
Moving on to Section 2, the fishing net metaphor. To illustrate exactly how deeply trapped we really are by these bonds, the author introduces a remarkably powerful and honestly quite alarming visual metaphor.
The text paints a genuinely grim picture here. Xu Feng writes that the array of affection is basically a giant net. He visualizes humanity from this heavenly perspective, looking down and seeing everyone as oblivious fish caught in a fisherman's net. If a fish swims into the net and can't escape, it gets yanked out of the water to become a meal. In his spiritual framework, humans caught in the net of affection are destined for destruction, eventually becoming delicacies on the devil's dining table. It is a stark, totally uncompromising warning about the spiritual dangers of our earthly attachments.
Which brings us to Section 3, ranking the hardest nets. Xu Feng doesn't just leave it at a general warning. He carefully categorizes and actually ranks our earthly attachments by how difficult they are to sever. It's basically a hierarchy of human entanglement.
Looking at his hierarchy, ranked in number 1, the absolute hardest nets to escape are the bonds between parents and children. Xu Feng notes that abandoning this affection feels monstrous. He directly asks, would they still be human? Ranked second is the affection between couples. Interestingly, he observes that modern trends, like choosing not to marry or getting a divorce, actually serve as a way of escaping this specific net.
And finally, ranked third are the nets of lovers. While maybe not the most deeply rooted historically, the text describes this specific net as the absolute most violently volatile.
When describing this agonizing trap of romantic love, Xu uses some incredibly visceral language. He notes that people will willingly risk hell itself for these volatile relationships. The text literally says that people will fight for victory in a fleeting moment, and even with their heads broken and bleeding, they will fly desperately like moths into flames. This really highlights why this matters so much in his philosophy. Human beings aren't just passively trapped. We actively, desperately hurl ourselves into the very nets that consume us.
Okay, Section 4, the path to escape. Having established the absolute torment of this inescapable net and the incredibly grim fate of those caught inside it, how do you even get out? Well, Xu outlines a highly specific spiritual path to break free.
He actually maps out a very explicit methodology here. First off, he asserts that you simply cannot escape on your own. Step 1 is relying on divine authority and guidance. He specifically cites the divine powers of figures like Jesus Christ and Buddha Shakyamuni. Steps 2 and 3 are very specific to his movement, becoming what he calls a Chanyuan celestial and entering the new oasis for life. And finally, the ultimate culmination of this process is step 4, ceasing to establish any special relationship with anyone else whatsoever, period, especially romantic ones. Only by completely halting the creation of these bonds can you break the net.
And finally, Section 5, entering the oasis. So what actually happens when you pull this off? Once a person ceases to establish these entangling relationships, the author describes a profound, transcendent shift in their daily existence. He illustrates this newfound spiritual liberation through some really vivid and honestly kind of surprising metaphors. Xu likens the feeling of freedom to a frog finally crawling out of the dark bottom of a well into a massive pond, or a wild horse previously stuck in suffocating silt suddenly returning to a wide-open prairie, a caged bird flying into a forest, and, my personal favorite, a pig jumping right out of a pig pen to become a human. The contrast he's building is clear. Earthly affection is a dark, muddy cage, and severing those ties is the ultimate expanse of freedom. The text culminates in this ultimate Zen-like ideal for human existence. Xu says a liberated person should be like the wind passing through bamboo, making a sound as it moves, but leaving absolutely no trace behind once it's gone. He urges the reader to enjoy the scenery of life, absolutely, but never to stay obsessed with it, and never let anyone impede your spiritual ascent. It really forces us to ask a deeply provocative final question. Is total detachment from human affection the true path to spiritual enlightenment? Or does leaving no trace mean missing out on the very essence of what makes us human in the first place? Thank you for exploring this wild text with me, and I hope this breakdown really helped illuminate Xu completely unique perspective.